Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology.
Well, welcome people. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. Today, I got a special guest, Dr. Gary Byers. Let me read his bio to you. It's quite interesting. Dr. Gary Byers serves on a ABR dig staff as co-director and senior archaeologist of the Shiloh excavation in Israel. That's right, Shiloh, where the tabernacle used to be. Quite exciting. He also currently serves as the Dean of the College of Archaeology at Trinity Southwest University in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He is currently completing his PhD at Veritas International University, that's also located at the Trinity Southwest campus in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Excavation and field experience. This is quite extensive. I'll give you a heads up. Assistant Director at Shiloh in Israel, 2017 to present. Assistant Director at Tel El Hammam in Jordan, 2006 to present. Administrative Director at Kibbutz El Carter, and Senior Archaeologist, Israel, 1995 to 2011. I understand there's a small break in time, but basically 95 to 2011. And excavation staff at Tel Mikna Ekron in Israel in 1984. So you've been around for quite a while in the field. And for people that don't know, sometimes we give Tel names like Tel Mikna, but understand Ekron is one of the Pentapolis for the Philistine cities mentioned in the biblical narrative. Adjunct professor at Faith Theological Seminary, 2013 to 2018. Member of the Board of Directors of Near Eastern Archaeological Society, 2000 to present. Serves on the Board of Directors of Associates of Biblical Research, 2004 to 2019. And is a member of the American School of Oriental Research. Welcome to the program, Dr. Gary Byers.
Hello, my friend. It's good to be with you.
Well, thank you very much. Now, you got it super interesting. And honestly, folks, what we did is I tried to get Dr. Byers on the program, and he's very gracious to do this. I seen him do this presentation before, and I really liked it. It's a very interesting tomb. That's right, a tomb in Egypt. The location is called Bene Hassan, meaning the sons of Hassan. And I'm not going to give any more away. I'm not going to be no spoiler alert. Dr. Byers.
I'm glad to be with you, George. And George and I dug at Tel El Hammam decades ago. And it's good to be with him again. And we are kind of neighbors. So I'm going to share with you, George. This is one of those Egyptian tombs that it's fascinating. Period. Most of them are that have wall paintings, but this one particularly has a biblical connection that I just love. So here we go. All right. Well, we're going to talk about the Aamu procession. And this is a group of people that show up in a scene on the tomb of Khnum-Hotep II. And we'll talk about who he is. And as George said, at Bene Hassan, that's the name of a local Bedouin tribe, the sons of Hassan, as he said, and it's in Middle Egypt. And let me just show you where that is. So we're at Middle Egypt, and right here is where Bene Hassan is located. Upper Egypt, rivers flow from the mountains to the sea. And so Upper Egypt is where the mountains are. That's in the south. Lower Egypt is where the sea is. That's the Med. And so Upper Egypt is in the south. Lower Egypt is in the north. That's counterintuitive to our maps. That's how it is. And then, of course, in between upper and lower, there's middle. And Middle Egypt, and I've got Bene Hassan marked there on the map. So there's Cairo up there in Lower Egypt in the north. And here's where the capital city is this is the Fayum Oasis. And this is where the capital city is. The site has never been found, but it's over here in this area, just to the right of to the east of the Fayoum Oasis. So we're not going to go to the capital, but we're going to be at Bene Hassan, where our buddy Khnum Hotep was living and working. So this is a look. So of course that's the Nile River. We're looking east, and these tombs are on the east bank of the Nile. Now that's unusual in Egypt because overwhelmingly tombs are on the west bank. The sun rises in the east, that's where people live. The sun sets in the west and it's dark. That's where they bury people, and especially pharaohs, important people. But because these wonderful hills with this great rock is on the east side, and there's nothing on the west side for miles, we're guessing, is the reason that they decided to bury these folks on the east side, not the normal west side of the Nile. So we're on the west side looking east, and there's 39 of these rock-cut monumental tombs. And those are you can see along that stretch there, you see maybe 6 or 7 or 8 of them. Then down below on the lower level, and on the lower level, there's almost 900 tombs, just simply shaft tombs, a vertical shaft cut into the rock, not in dirt, cut into the rock, where they buried people who weren't so elite and could afford such nice tombs. And we're going to go to the second big tomb from the left. That's the left is north. We're going to go to that location and look at Khnum Hotep's tomb. Now that's the outside look. Everything is carved out of stone. That this is an outer courtyard, which is typical for fancy tombs, tombs of the elite, important people. So you can see that's been carved right down to make an outside courtyard. Those pillars are simply carved out of the rock, the mountain. And then you're going to go inside that little porch, and there's a doorway, and everything is just carved right out of the mountain. And that's, by the way, that's Khnum Hotep's name in hieroglyphics down in the front. Khnum is one of the ancient gods of Egypt, one of the old ones, and he was the creator god. And he made man he made man sort of as a piece of pottery on a potter's wheel. And of course, we got some Bible verses that say God, the God of the Bible, says that's exactly what he did. So that's Khnum on the left. And then I honestly don't know what the jar means right behind him, but beyond that, it's Hotep. And that's the rest of his name. So that's Khnum Hotep, and you pronounce every letter there in the Egyptian text. So here we are, the interior. So we just came from the left through that passageway. There's the 2 pillars, and then the doorway coming in, and then there's 4 pillars inside. Everything again cut out of the mountain. The pillars were not added; they were cut, but they've disappeared. All but just a little bit of it. And then at the far end, the eastern end, there's a little room, and that's where a shrine to Khnum Hotep was. And we think his body was probably buried in a pit dug on the right-hand side, but we actually don't know. Sometimes these are we call them chapels because they were placed to remember somebody, whether they were actually buried there or not. So that's Khnum on those barks on the water on the Nile River, and he's fishing and catching birds and doing all kinds of things. So in the afterlife, they're thinking he's going to do the same kind of thing in the afterlife. They painted on the tomb, describing not only who he was in this life, but what they hope he's going to be able to do in the next. And so that's the east wall. The north wall is just to the left, and that's where we're going to go. And we see the dude right there, and this is where we're going to go for most of our time. So there's that north wall. That's him standing there on the right. Now this is the actual wall painting on top, and then this is a drawing that was done by archaeologists. Interestingly enough, this tomb was excavated in the early 20th century. And one of the artists who drew it And sometimes they draw the black and white scenes, which this one is, but sometimes they draw the colored scenes. And one of the artists that worked on the scenes in this tomb, we don't have any record that he worked on this particular stuff, but he worked in this tomb. Howard Carter, the finder of the one who discovered King Tut's tomb in 1922. We celebrated that just a couple of years ago, the 100th anniversary. He got his start at age 17 drawing in this tomb. We don't know what part he did, but that's what he did. So this is an example of the deal. So here we've got Khnum on the wall painting up the top, and here we've got him on the bottom. And he is not he's a government official, a federal official who's in charge of the Eastern Desert. And that's one of the things that we're going to be focusing on. And these are all scenes from his life. They're all pretty typical of ancient elite government rulers' tomb scenes. They all kind of did the same things in their lives, and they all wanted to be remembered for those same things. And maybe they did them all. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But that's the way they want to at least be portrayed. But we're going to look up top here on this row right here that comes right up to his face. And I don't think that's particularly significant, although his son is actually, and look on the bottom row, you see in the drawing, you can see a little better. His son is actually presenting his father with a papyrus explaining who these people are. And these people in this scene are different from all the other people on the tomb walls all the way around. The walls, the ceiling, everything was painted, and these folks are absolutely unique. So here's a look at that group in particular, close up. There's 18 people here. We've got men, mostly men, but we have 4 women here, and we've got 2 younger children, and there's an older child right here, and we've got 2 donkeys, and we've got 2 wild animals, and they're bringing them, and there's Khnum-Hotep's son presenting the papyrus explanation of these people that are here. And they are dressed so much differently and carrying equipment that is quite different from everybody else painted all around Khnum's tomb. And here's a modern drawing of the group. So you can see it much better. And there's just a whole bunch of interesting things about these folks. First of all, their clothing is so different from everybody else on the scene all the way around the tomb. Everybody else is wearing loincloths, these kind of linen cloths, generally long or short. Guys who have more government official jobs are wearing the long, just below the knee kilts. Others, most of the people on the tomb are wearing just a linen loincloth. That's all. The Egyptians are always painting themselves as darker. The Egyptians typically paint the black Africans south of them, starting in Nubia. They generally paint them more blackish. They tend to paint themselves reddish or brownish, and they tend to paint the Asiatics from the east more yellowish. It's coming off more tan here. And that's a standard convention of Egyptian art for almost all periods. So these are the Egyptian guys with a unique sort of Egyptian hairstyles versus the Canaanite hairstyles or the Semites or the Asiatics. Archaeologists use different terms. Probably the best term, they're Asiatics. And when we think of Asiatics, we think of the Far East. These are Asiatics from the Middle East. And so they're dressed absolutely differently, these colored garments. And again, the colored garment, linen does not take color well. The Egyptians always dressed in white linen. But the colored garments, we know this from finding ancient garments, and they're almost exclusively, until we get to the Greco-Roman period, they're almost exclusively made of wool because wool takes color better. And so these folks are wearing wool garments that are colored, and of course, colored in the sense of every piece of thread on that garment was either white or it was colored another color. So this is an extensive amount of work to make these clothes, which means these people are not just nobody. These people are a big deal. They've got resources, they've got power, they've got knowledge. These are people that are significant. And that's why, apparently, this scene is unheralded in Egyptian tombs. That's why two officials, including the king, not the king, Khnum-Hotep's son, are presenting them officially to the administrator of the Eastern Desert. Now, we can't take a lot of time on this, but let me just point out some of the items they have. These actually look like billows that we're familiar with in a more modern day. We don't think that that's what they are. They although they have some connections to something like that, we don't know exactly. There's a spear. There is a lyre. I'm not talking about the man. I'm talking about the musical instruments he's holding. This guy is holding a mace. He's got a bow. Even the little guy's got a short spear, and these guys have spears. They have either, these are probably throw sticks as opposed to a mace there. And then they're bringing two wild animals that they've got control of, and they're leading with that. So apparently they are gifts to Khnum-Hotep from these Asiatics from the East who are well-dressed and thus pretty significant people. And that has to be the reason they show up on Khnum-Hotep's tomb. So two things to note. There is an inscription up top here that describes who these people are, with a little inscription about who the Egyptians are. This is who the leader is. And then it's also written on this papyrus tablet. So the inscription up here says, the coming on account of bringing Mesdemet, and we'll talk about that, which 37 Aamu brought to him. So these people are coming with a special product to Egypt. And we're going to talk about that product in a little bit and maybe what that means to them. But that's what all this said. And there's the number 30, 10, 20, 30, and then 7, 37 Asiatics. And then this is the rest of the stuff. And there's I give you a little secret, little heads up. This Mesdemet has to do with eye makeup. Kohl is the modern term that's used to describe it. And then this is what's written on the papyrus scroll. In year 6, under the majesty of Horus, uniter of the two lands, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, and his name is Ka-Kefer Ra, or we also know him from his Greek name, Senusret II. This is in his 6th year of his reign, the accounting of the Amaru that the son of the mayor Khnum-Hotep brought because of Mesdemet, being Amaru of Shu, number amounting to 37. So there's only 18 in the scene, but there's 37 of them total, according to both the inscriptions. So let's just talk about the nature of the scene a little bit. First, it gives us the regnal year in the inscription, the 6th year of Senusret, and he's a pharaoh in the 12th dynasty. A pretty significant guy. Now, this is not Senusret's tomb, but it's one of his officials, while the kingdom, the capital, is down there by the Fayum Oasis, where the pharaoh is. Khnum-Hotep is in the Eastern Desert there at Bene Hassan. We don't know. We know the name of the city where they lived, but we do not know where that city is located to date. But there was a major city where government officials lived for decades, for centuries. That city has disappeared, and we still do not know where it was today. But we know there was a lot of them because we got these 39 elite tombs and almost 900 shaft tombs cut into the solid rock. Now, these aren't tombs of regular people who just got buried in the dirt. These are people of some significance. Even the shaft tombs, they were government workers or something. So big deal. In the 6th year of Sennacherib is when this particular scene took place in Khnum-Hotep's life. These folks are non-Egyptian. Their clothing, their sandals, their hairstyles, and their objects all indicate that. By the way, you saw the weapons. In Egyptian paintings, and most of them are tomb paintings, you never have foreigners carrying weapons. They just don't do it. They're not allowed to, or at least the Egyptians didn't portray them as being allowed to. Whatever the real situation was, we're getting their propaganda, if you would. But they're depicting the real world. So seeing these people with their own weapons suggests that they were highly respected and trusted in Egypt. Whether Khnum knew them before or not, we don't know. But certainly these are players in their world, in their day. And this is the 19th century BC. And secondly, care was taken in being very specific in the details of the weapons of that lyre. That is an Eastern musical instrument. And it's an amazing scene to be seen in this tomb. They are foreigners, and as foreigners, they're understood to be part of the chaotic powers that threatens Egypt's cosmic order. The Nile River is order, and the Nile River brings floods every year that flood the fields and bring fresh soil. And that's where the people lived, and that's how they lived, based on the order of the Nile. And then once you get east or west of the Nile, it's the chaos of the desert. And out of the desert come foreigners. And so they're part of the chaotic powers that threaten the cosmos, the order of the Egyptians. And they were standardly depicted as Egypt's enemies until the New Kingdom tribute scenes. So this is a regular deal that they always see, and they come in bringing tribute to the king, to Pharaoh, but they just don't get to be seen with weapons. And this suggests, what we're seeing in this scene suggests that this represents, or at least it alludes to, a very real event. This is not something somebody just decided to make up. There's just too many details. It just makes too much sense. Even the date of the Pharaoh, this is a real event in Khnum-Hotep's life. Now here's our stuff, Mesdemet. It says this is the reason they came, this Mesdemet stuff. It was a natural occurring mineral ore. We call it galena today, or lead sulfide. This is what these folks came to bring to Khnum-Hotep, apparently to him in particular. Maybe they brought it all over Egypt. We don't know, but at least to him. Mesdemet, or galena, consists of two naturally occurring elements. That's lead and sulfide. It's mined as an ore, it's mined as an ore, and really lead is the key. When it's got lead sulfide, then they can do more with it. It's the main ingredient of coal, the black eyeliner used by Egyptians for social status, maybe for sun glare reduction, possibly for repulsion of flies. And it produced a nitric oxide, which modern chemists have decided stimulates the immune system. So it seemed to have worked for the Egyptians. They used it for a long time, a long period. Certainly it provided social status. You had to be rich enough to be able to own some and to wear it. And it probably did help with sun glare and maybe with repulsion of flies, but it did seem to have some medical properties that whether the ancient Egyptians realized it or not, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but that's what this mesdomet would do. And its most common compound is silver. Lead and silver are often found and mined together. So silver was a big part of this deal, and it was used in smelting metals, a specialized knowledge and skill. And I'm actually going to suggest that our Amaru that are coming from the East, they are so well dressed. They seem to have so much wealth, prestige, and power. They are probably not miners, but they're probably the people that knew how to smelt these ancient metals and turn rock into gold or silver or copper, whatever, lead. And so these are like the IT professionals of our day. Maybe there's a better analogy, but somebody that really knows how to program can make a really good living with their skill sets. And of course, they're always learning, getting better, knowing more. I would suggest that these people who show up with their equipment, and I'm not sure what all that equipment means, but I'm going to suggest that these are probably people with that special, almost magical ability to turn stone into metal. And so whenever they are around, people would treat them with respect, but because of their skill, they have been paid well, they live well, they are people of power and means and influence. And just another note that galena, which is PBS, lead sulfide, is not harmful to touch. And it's also the official state metal of Kansas, Missouri, and Wisconsin. So it's something that we know and use today in our lives and in our world. But now, so that's what the mesdomet was. Let's just talk about our people a little bit more. The Amaru, the word, that's a word that's used in Egyptian, but it's a Semitic loan word, probably Western Semitic, maybe even an Amorite, originally an Amorite word. They used the term in the Old and Middle Kingdom text and connected Amaru with any Semitic-speaking people from the east or northeast of the Nile Valley. That's Canaan. That's the southern Levant. That's Syria. That's that region. Now, they maybe have had some Babylonians wander in at some point from farther to the east, but probably not. But they did know Semitics, and they were called by the Egyptians. There were other terms, but that was one of the terms they often used, Amaru. The Amaru leader here, his name is Abishari in the Egyptian text, but that would be Abishai in the Hebrew or Semitic. And his title, which is also given there in the inscription, was ruler of the hill lands. And ruler of the hill lands, that word in the Greek, the Greeks define that word as Hyksos. Now, Hyksos was a group of Semitic people who came into Egypt after the days of Khnum-Hotep, after the days of his king Sennacherib II, in what we call the Second Intermediate Period. And so many Amaru came into Egypt, into the Delta area. They never got much down farther. They just went into the Delta, the wide Delta area, living mostly on the eastern side of the Delta, right where they would enter. They just stayed there. And there were so many of these Amaru in the Delta area that they ultimately just took over. We don't know how much of a planned thing it was. There's suggestions that even kings from Canaan supplied soldiers and arms to actually take over the lower Egypt there in the Delta area. But whatever actually happened, they took over for about 200 years. And that was called the Second Intermediate Period, and they were the Hyksos. And they were the ones that ruled that part of Egypt. And even they never controlled Thebes, but they certainly had Thebes in down south in Upper Egypt, the capital in those days, earlier in those days. They actually had them under their thumb at times. Very, very powerful. Well, now this is way before the Hyksos as a group are going to take over a couple hundred years, but this leader actually has that name, ruler of the hill lands. It says they the Aamu of Shu, and Shu was seemingly their homeland in the southern Levant. And more specifically, scholars think it looks like it's the area just east of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. And George and I know that area because we excavated there. And I did it for 16 years. He did it for 2 or 3. So that seems to be the region. They don't seem to be people from the west side, based on what archaeologists have been able to understand. Probably not the west side of the Jordan River, which we would call Israel or Palestine today, but on the east side, what we would call Jordan today. And the Aamu carried the Mesdemet, the dark eye paint, the coal, or they carried galena used in the metal smelting process. So one way or the other, these guys were involved with a product that they had probably the secret to smelt. They knew how to smelt it, and they had the finished product, either the mesdemet, the eye black itself, or the special metal that could be used in smelting copper or gold or silver. And they didn't really have any silver, but they did have gold, and they certainly had copper in Egypt. And so these Aamu came as traders, desert guides, diplomats, migrant workers, or metalsmiths with special knowledge and skills. All of the Aamu that came would have been in one of these classifications. Our guys on this scene, we think, were none other than special metal workers, metalsmiths, knowing how to smelt metals with specialized knowledge and skills. And here's what now. So that's all that. That's the story of Khnum-Hotep's tomb. But as you look at this scene, and I don't know when you're going to put Abraham. Some put Abraham before the days of Khnum-Hotep. Some put Abraham after the days of Khnum-Hotep. But somewhere in the world of Khnum-Hotep, the scene that we have here, 18 showing, 37 in the inscription that came from Canaan, from that region. They marched into Egypt, and you just can't help, as you look at these people, men, women, children, and stuff, you can't help but think about Genesis 46 that said not 37, but 66 people came with Jacob into Egypt when they left Canaan to go into Egypt, invited by Joseph, their son, his son, their brother. And when you look at this scene, think Canaanites, think Israelites in Canaan during that time period. And remember, Joseph had a coat of many colors. I like to look at the leader's coat, his up to his shoulders, all the way down past his knees, that robe, that coat that he's wearing. That makes me think multicolors. That makes me think the Joseph's many-colored, technicolored coat that he had. So that's the story of just one scene from the tomb of Khnum-Hotep II in Bene Hassan in Egypt, and it tells the story, the amazingly unique story of those coming from the east, from Canaan, from the Holy Land, into Egypt in the general time period of Abraham, the general time period of Jacob. And we've got almost a picture that God gave us to describe a little bit of them, their world, how it must have been like. Okay, George, that's my Khnum-Hotep II tomb.
Thank you very much. That's the one I remembered that you did for ABR. I think it was called Digging the Truth. And I seen that. I said, that's the one I want, at least the first one. And then I'll see if I can get them to do more, because I watched a number of your presentations. I really appreciate this. This is wonderfully done, easy to follow. Now, of course, I warned you ahead of time that I kind of try to think in the mind of the viewer, possibly
Absolutely.
what kind of questions they might ask. Or maybe we can, like you said, we look at the scriptural narrative and what it says that might culturally be relevant to the time period in Egypt that we're seeing. You just said the coat of many colors or
Yeah.
the type of weapons being used. I noticed that there's no horses here. It looks like they're just donkeys.
Yes,
So
no
it's a time
horses.
period before, yeah, it's a time period before horses and chariots were used in Egypt.
In fact, George, it was the later Hyksos, the later Semites, the later Asiatics, Amorites, whatever term you want to use, who came in from they actually what we understand, they came by way of Syria down through the Holy Land, Canaan, and then into Egypt with horses and chariots and composite bows. And these guys seem to have composite bows. I should have said that. These guys seem to have, especially that last guy, a composite bow. And so all that came with the Hyksos into Egypt, starting with guys like this, but certainly this big group that came later when they took control of the Delta.
You know, and that's a good point because an archaeologist who, if one is familiar with archaeologists, Manfred Bitock,
Yeah.
in digging in the location where the Hyksos eventually placed their
Yeah.
capital, Tel El Daba or Avaris. In excavating, they found tombs of the Hyksos, and some are actually buried with their horses. So now we got an
Yes.
indication of when horses were actually brought into Egypt.
Yeah.
Very true. Thanks for reminding me and the listening audience of that because Joseph rides in a chariot with the Pharaoh, does he not? Or
Yes.
alongside the Pharaoh. It gives us cultural little clues in the biblical narrative, such as the coat of many colors and riding in a chariot. Uh, I don't think they're playing with yo-yos yet. No yo-yos.
No yo-yos as far as I know.
Let's see. You mentioned a young Howard Carter, of course, painting some pictures of the artwork, the frescoes, if you will, in the tomb. And Howard Carter, of course, you mentioned was the excavator who found King Tut's tomb, I believe, in 1922. For
Yep.
the listening audience, Howard Carter. You gave the date to the 12th dynasty in Egypt, which would be the 19th century BCE, which brought into remembrance a find by Sir Flinders Petrie around 1890. No, it's around 1905, so a little bit over 100 years ago, in the copper mines in the Sinai. He found the first evidence of Proto-Sinaitic alphabet, right?
Yes.
If I could use the term, a derivative of the hieroglyphs. So they take the hieroglyphs, they gave certain hieroglyphs sounds and produced what we would call the first alphabet. It's just interesting that this happens also. The dates correspond pretty much. I think they date the Sinaitic, it does vary, between 1900 BC and 1800 BC. I think
So
that's fascinating.
So George, I
Go
didn't
ahead.
I didn't want to take the time to go into it, but I actually think so that those were found at copper mines and turquoise mines there
Right.
in Serabit El Kadim. And these people, these weren't miners. These people that we're looking at, they weren't miners. They were the smelters of copper. They were the
Mhm.
ones who would do that kind of work that seemed like magic to the ancients. And they were from the East. And if anybody knows anything about in their world, if they knew anything from living in the East about hieroglyphics and they're business people and they wanted to learn how to communicate, I would not be surprised if the first people that began to create the 22 letters of the proto Hebrew alphabet I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they weren't people just like these folks. And maybe, as you made the connection, maybe even these folks at a time when they were in the Sinai.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. The people in the fresco from the tomb are skilled,
Yeah.
whereas the tomb would be the mines in Sinai would be laborers.
Yes. Yeah.
But somebody was pretty smart.
Somebody was very wise.
Also, you mentioned a number of activities that they could do, these Amaru, as as occupations. So whether they could work with the metals, but do other things as well. Um, and you said that on these pack animals, we don't know if those are bellows or not.
We know that when they were smelting, they certainly used bellows, but they were foot bellows, and
Okay.
they just don't look kind of like foot bellows, but we don't know exactly sure. We know they had bellows. They we don't know what period, how early the bellows started, but they were certainly using them a few hundred years later in their smelting of metals. So I'd like to think these are bellows, but we just don't know.
Okay. Well, if they're not bellows, they could be accordions. They kind of look like
That's
accordions.
right.
But I think it's fascinating because also in the biblical narrative, early on in Genesis, it mentions the descendants of Cain,
Yep.
as being forgers of metal,
Yes.
artificers of metals.
Yes.
I'm not saying absolutely. I just think it's fascinating. Also, when we look at Moses, this is, of course, centuries later, and it's speculation, coming out of Egypt, he meets with the tribe of Midian because he was Jethro or
Yep.
Hobab, depends on which. So we'll just say Jethro. He's the more popular of the names, which directs Moses to the high mountain where he confronts Adonai. I'll be respectful and just say Adonai. And in that, of course, he marries his wife, the Pori. Now I'm getting to a point because there are other sub tribes in that area that go into the promised land supposedly with Moses, according to the scripture. And one are the Kenites.
Yep.
And some of the information that I read about the Kenites was that they also were artificers of metals. And during the book of Judges, I shouldn't say in the book of Judges, with that battle, some scholars, critical scholars, would say this is some of the earliest text from a critical view, is that of Deborah. All right. And with that, there's a battle with a general from Hatzor. His name is Sisera. And Sisera loses, and he leaves his chariot in the muck, and he takes off, and he goes into the tent of a woman who's a Kenite. And it makes me wonder that Sisera feels comfortable enough to go, and I'm just speculating, go into the tent with this woman and trust her that he's going to fall asleep even. I just wonder if these people were making metal objects as well. And they're familiar with this, and they're just merchants and they're selling. But who is their allegiance to? Blood's thicker than water.
Yeah.
Their allegiance was to these tribal people under Deborah, because what does she do? She drives a spike in the head of Sisera. I don't know for sure, but when I kind of follow this through, I to myself, I just find it absolutely fascinating, in different angles.
Yep.
That's my 2.5 cents. 2.5 because of inflation.
Good insights. Good thoughts. Great thoughts. Thank you, man. It's been a
Well, I
privilege.
think it's a lot of fun. I really appreciate your presentation, Doctor. I've had a lot of fun, and I'm sure the listening audience is going to get a lot out of this as we studied the scriptural narrative together and try to piece this together with using the skills of archaeology and what they have found and how to interpret what has been found in the strata levels in excavations, which you've probably been doing now for 30 plus years. So you got a lot of experience. Once again, let's give a plug. You're from Albuquerque, New Mexico. You're on the Rio Rancho side, but that's Albuquerque, New Mexico. You're at Trinity Southwest University, and you're also studying at Veritas. Once again, thanks for your time, Doctor. I appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. It's been a joy.